Welcome to the Arena Decklist Podcast. I'm Gerry Thompson, joined, as always, by Brian Gottlieb. We have a tiny bit of Streets of New Capenna previews, and we're going to talk some Modern. But first, Brian, I have like a grinding my gears-esque segment that I want to discuss with you.
Well, please, I would hate to stop you from grinding your gears. So just go off, King.
So, have you been watching any of the streams where like people are watching old coverage? For example, Todd Anderson's stream.
I've popped in for a little bit. Well, specifically because Todd just like tagged me one day out of the blue and answered a question I asked on stream, and I'm just like, "What are you talking about, Todd?" I think he literally thought it was just 6 years ago when he was involved in the discussion. So I caught a little bit of that, but I don't like regularly watch it. I've just popped in here or there.
Okay, I mean, maybe it's more appealing for, you know, for me. I was going to a lot of those tournaments.
Yeah,
right?
you're a player in a lot of them. That's interesting.
Yeah, some of them. I do remember watching a few where I'm just like, was I at this tournament? Was I not at this tournament? Like, what was going on? And there were definitely some where I just couldn't remember. I had no idea because like I didn't know the exact time frame and like where I lived, but certainly once I moved back to Roanoke for a little bit, I was at all of them.
Right.
But yeah, just watching those old tournaments, there's a lot involved in all of that, right? Like a lot of feelings and emotions, whatever. I'm not going to get into that. That's played out, right? But the thing that I think about is why could I not, and this applies to many, many people, but like, why could I not put down the bullshit and just play good decks in tournaments?
Well, I would argue, I don't know if I actually believe this. I'm going to argue it anyway, because everyone loves when people do that. I would argue that there was a lot of value in you picking up the bullshit because you needed a way to distinguish yourself and market yourself and create a brand for yourself. And look how your brand has endured. Even with all of the changes, you were still you. You were still Gerry T. You were still out there. People still know about you, care about you. Yes. So I understand what you're saying, but you know the answer. Like if you look in your soul, it was about notoriety and attention. You wanted to be the smartest person in the room. That's always what it is. It always, always, always is about that.
Yeah, but I could debate you on that a little bit. I think there was something else going on there. I certainly do have those feelings, of course. But what happens when you fail, right? It's like you're not the smartest person in the room. Obviously, you're chasing that high of when you actually do gin it.
When you were the smartest person
right.
in the room. Yeah.
And it just takes away from being the smartest person in the room the one time, the other 10 times when you were just like very, very not smart. So logically, it doesn't really make sense. I think for the purposes of making content, like, yeah, it's good, but also
it's about goals. It's all about goals. Like if your goal was to win the tournament, it was a really dumb idea. You should have just focused on playing the best thing possible.
Well, that's part of the problem too, is because I would truly think and feel that I was trying to win the tournament. And that was like my number one goal overall, but it wasn't really, you know? And I think now that I'm, I don't know, almost a decade removed from some of those events, like I understand what was going on, but certainly back then it was like, I would tell you that and honestly believe it was true when clearly it wasn't, because, you know, there were just eras where this thing was obviously the best thing to be doing. And for as well as I did with like Jeskai Black or whatever, it's like clearly Rally was the better deck, you know? So it's just stuff like that. And I think back on my career a lot where there are missed opportunities, and some of them are not as close, where it's like, it wasn't really clear what deck was the best. And like, should I have known these things going in with the information I had? Probably not, you know, but there are definitely ones where I'm like, yo, this deck would have been so good that weekend. And obviously I should have known that. Or like I did know it, but I just played some bullshit instead.
I think there's two alternative explanations you can push as to why maybe you didn't make those decisions as often as you should have. First is level of discourse, technology, understanding. Like all of those things. I know it feels like it wasn't that long ago, right? How much less could we possibly have known? But that's not the way these games work. Like the community collectively understands more over time. There's more experience to draw from. I always go back to Ponder as an example, and like Ponder probably not seen as much play as it should have when it was first legal. And now
maybe that discussion actually came up on one of Todd's recent streams.
Sure. And I think that's fair. Like there's debate to be had. I don't think you could say it was played enough. Like you can certainly debate various spots.
Yeah, it's like, should you have played it in fairies? It's like I think
that's the one.
I think the jury's still out on that one.
Sure, that's fair. But regardless, the card should have been played more. And if it was released now, or really anything close to Ponder, that would inform the decision-making process. So things like that change over time. I also think there's some. No, you know what? I'm not even going to make that argument. I'm going to leave it at that. That's my other interpretation of how that could happen.
So my feelings on this at the time were, I want to play the best deck that I also enjoy playing.
Mm-hmm.
And because I'm playing these tournaments every weekend, and I didn't want to just like play Jund or whatever. It's boring. It's repetitive. It's not fun. And I think that the fire is really lit when I am engaged. And I think that I probably cared a lot more in a lot of the tournaments as a result because of that. And I've given this advice before where it's like, get the bullshit out of your system on ladder or in the Magic Online queues, but when it's time for the tournament, actually like play the good thing. And it makes it feel like work in a lot of instances, but it all depends on like, what you want to happen as a result of the tournament, right?
Yeah.
And
it does till the final table, right? That's like when it all the actual act of being in contention for winning a big event takes over any deck decisions and any like, did I enjoy this play style at that point?
Right. So yeah, I don't know. I think back on a lot of these tournaments, and even with like whatever accolades or like people say about me or whatever, it's just like I should have won a lot more, and I should have been trying to win a lot more, and I just wasn't. There are so many Legacy Opens, dude, where I just played like random garbage because I just wanted to have fun. And I didn't have like many opportunities to play Legacy, and it's just like I should have just like played Delver or Miracles or whatever and like won those tournaments. And then when people are like, oh, who's the best SCG Tour player, it's like, it's me, obviously, like that would be cool.
Yeah, well, next go around, you can feel free to always play the best deck. I can't fault you. You're speaking to someone who registered Thalia in his Miracles deck at a GP.
What?
Lost playing for top 8. Oh yeah. Yep. Thalia got us to the sea. It was
Thassa.
I'm sorry. My fault.
I was like, Thalia doesn't make any sense.
It does not. No, that would be very silly. Thassa got us to the sea was what I was thinking of.
Thassa's not terrible. I remember some people playing that as like a one of.
Yeah, I think it was me. I think it was just me and me talking people into it. And I had like Enlightened Tutor package and Humility. This was like during the Sneak and Show era.
Okay.
So.
Well, I think that Enlightened Tutor is just a bad card.
Probably true.
And
I'm not here to support my decisions. I'm just saying, like, if I had just played Miracles, which I was playing basically at the start of that deck existing, I was very, very good at playing. I probably like top 8 that tournament. And,
Yeah. So I don't know.
But I also remember a mirror match where I pulled my second counterbalance to turn on my Thassa and got to kill his Jace the Mind Sculptor. So was it worth it? Maybe it was worth it.
Yeah, but that could have been a Vidillion click that just like killed everyone.
I'm not talking about that.
I know.
Had to be the Thassa.
Anyway, I'm watching these streams and I'm just like, damn it, why just every year that is like not now. I'm just like, I was so much less smart than I am now and made poor decisions, and they're not life-altering decisions or anything, but it's like, why was younger me not as smart as current me? And it's like, well, clearly that's the answer, but still.
Yes, that is unfortunately the way life works, and you can't go back and do those things over. So just take solace in the fact that you can recognize that younger you was a crappier person. If you didn't have that experience and that knowledge, you would just have been stagnant all this time.
Isn't it wild that some people get crappier as they get older?
It is wild.
That blows my mind.
I hope I'm avoiding that myself. But there are like, I think my general arc is one of redemption and being better, but also there's discrete elements of fuck it all in there. Like that's just totally woven in.
No, I feel you.
But I think the net is still, I turn out a better person It's just you run out of patience for some things as as you near the climax of your life. So
I totally understand that. So yeah, just folks, when you're making decisions, especially like what deck to play, obviously that there are factors that come into it. It's like, if you're playing modern, you only own one modern deck or whatever, or you don't want to pay $50 for Goldspan Dragons or whatever the answer is. I mean, I think that within your means, with what you have available to you and what your goals are, be honest with yourself. And if you are me and you do desperately want to win the tournaments and you want to like look back and be like, I tried my hardest to actually win those tournaments, then just do that. Follow through on that. And I think regardless of the outcome, I would have been more pleased with what happened in those events, because there are events where maybe I had a near miss or like I day two and did kind of mediocre or whatever, but I was like, I had the right deck, and I made good choices, and that is the thing that makes me happy. And I guess, maybe something different makes other people happy, but that's kind of how I look at it. So that was just my thing. And certainly like looking back too, there's just like so many other people who are playing decks that were not going to give them the best chance of winning while also kind of doing the same thing as me. But it's like, I don't know, why are we doing this?
I'm now concerned. It's virtually impossible for this to be true. I'm concerned that you are making a veiled criticism of the Earthlore Starvo deck I posted on our website today for Flesh and Blood.
That's a good segue. That's a good segue right there.
You secretly have learned, as far as I know, you don't know how to play the game, but you secretly learned it and are evaluating my deck and just trying to trash it right here on the air.
I don't know how to play the game, but this is Flesh and Blood. And yes. I did click on the article and I did read it until it was very clear that none of these words made any sense to me.
I said that at the start. It was literally the first sentence of the article.
I know, man, but I'm trying to, be supportive and like read the thing and see how it goes, right? But then it just at some point, like my eyes glazed over and I just started skimming because I can't help it. And I don't know, man. I understood the premise of some of the stuff that you were getting to, where it's just like, this is a thing that is maybe more difficult to achieve, but the upside is better.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Yep.
Yeah. I love that. I live for that. That's like potentially metagame breaking stuff. There was a card in Kaijudo that was a 1-mana spell that was just give a creature haste.
Okay.
And I just busted a format with it. Just straight up like cracked it in half, broke the game. It was never the same again.
Yeah, so this is like kind of related to the point too about like knowledge and collective knowledge. Is Flesh and Blood strikes me as a very unrefined game at this point. And I just think like there are fundamentals that people have picked up that were good for the nascent stages of the game. And I am not sure that some of those fundamentals are adapting appropriately, or I'm just wrong, which I'm totally willing to say is a possibility. And, people who have been around the game longer than me are going to ultimately be proven right. Totally possible. Just the way I perceive things, some things seem out of whack, and it seems like people are defaulting to certain options way too readily. And I want to challenge that a little bit. So am I doing the same thing though? Am I just playing a worse version of the deck? I don't think so, but maybe I'll look back on this 5 years from now and just be like, wow, I should have just played that other deck.
Maybe, but again, it depends on what your goal is. You're talking about in your article where you're just like, maybe this is the best thing to be doing, right? And I think that until you know that answer for sure, you can't necessarily say like, oh, I was trying my hardest or I wasn't trying my hardest, because it's like you also didn't have to play in a tournament and make a decision as to what to play.
Right. And it's different. It's not like I can, Flesh and Blood, there's no Magic Online equivalent. So I'm going to eventually play a tournament with this deck. And that's how I can figure it out. Until then, I can't get any kind of feedback. And also, even that is not going to be a large enough sample size. So you just can't generate the same kind of sample sizes under an all paper TCG, which is one of the things that's very interesting about the game. But.
Yeah. Anyway, that was my rant. You posted Flesh and Blood. You've marred our beautiful Magic website with a hideous Flesh and Blood article.
No, if there's, you are welcome to have any criticisms you want of Flesh and Blood. The cards are very nice though. The art's beautiful. The game's also very good, but we don't have to have that debate. It's a very nice thing to have on our website, I think.
I can't debate you because I don't know.
That's true. I
don't know. I take your word for it. And there are a lot of people that do like the game. I just have apprehensions about buying into a new game when so many of them, I've done that, and then they've been like dead in 2 years.
Yeah,
It's like
I can't make an argument against that. That
that's
is
all.
a real thing that can always happen. So.
That's honestly my only apprehension towards it. And it's like once it seems like it has solid footing and everything, then I'd be willing to try it, especially if a lot of like my friends and peers are playing it too.
Yeah, well, you will be welcomed with open arms when you're ready.
And then I can teach you all how to build decks.
There you go. Like I said, that's part of the draw.
Streets. There was a daily MTG stream that was a preview. It was like pre-beat, I believe is what Blake called it, where it's basically just some stuff to showcase like the set symbol and the logo for the set and some of the products that are coming out, and do like a little bit of preview stuff, just like a little tiny drip of spoilers, kind of like for everything that was involved. Like they showed off a lot of the art and some of the basic lands and stuff like that. So not a ton of spoilers, not a ton of hot action to talk about, but we did get to see that there are shard triomes, which is cool.
Yeah.
They're not explicitly called triomes, and they have specific names, which makes it less likely that they get reprinted.
Yeah, an odd decision, especially when they were seemingly so thoughtful about that the first go around.
Well, I mean, maybe you think it's odd, but maybe it's correct, right? Where they're just like, well, we did this once. It was we didn't like it. We didn't like what happened, so we've just decided that we're not going to do it again. And then if they want to do it again, they can just rename them or whatever, do slightly different lands instead of cycling, have a different mechanic or whatever.
Yeah, okay. I don't know. I didn't see anything about that last experiment that would lead me to believe that it wasn't a good idea to do so. But also, I don't know, there's sort of less of a need for thematic reliance at this point because there are so many products and different homes for these cards where if they like need a reprint, you can kind of do it somewhere else, or you can just call back to this place. I mean, they do return to planes quite often. This is a new and novel plane, although so is Ikoria. So yeah, I don't know. It struck me as an odd decision, but ultimately I'm just happy to have these cards back. I like playing with them quite a bit. So
I like them too. I didn't play a ton with Triomes, just in general. Obviously there's, one in a lot of different modern decks or whatever, but but as far as like jamming the quad Triome standard decks or like playing 8 of them in some 4-color Urian nonsense or whatever, like I didn't do a lot of that. So it's kind of weird.
That's interesting. I feel like my decks always had 4. I don't know why we ended up on different sides of the deck building equation there.
You like going a little bit bigger. You like being a little bit more mid-range. And if I can build like a cleaner 2-color deck, I usually will. And when we were talking about Ponder earlier, one of the things I thought of was how I won an open with 3 Preordains and 1 Ponder in my Cobblade deck. This is like after Stoneforge and Jace got banned.
Mm-hmm.
Basically because people were just like, Preordain's always better, and like, you don't play Ponder. And I was like, oh yeah? Well, I'm gonna try a Ponder instead for science, And I had a bunch of fetch lands, like more fetches than people were normally playing, but I also had a Myria Angel, and I also liked Celestial Colonnade way less than other people.
Mm-hmm.
So people would jam like 4 Colonnades, and it would, not only just mess up your first turn in a lot of instances, or like your turn 4 or something, but then it would also mess up your Glacial Fortresses a lot of the time. So a lot of the time I only played like 3 Glacial Fortress too. And then I was thinking about, Ponder and Preordain were both legal.
Yeah.
In standard for a long time.
Splinter Twin.
Right.
Like Splinter Twin was too. It's just a mind-blowing standard to think back on.
Yeah.
Especially for one that's like, granted there were bans and that was novel at the time, but I do think there's a lot of fondness for that particular standard that has now built up over time.
Yeah, even though it was pretty terrible, it was just like you could do 3, maybe 4 strategies that were even close to viable, and everything else was just dead money. And like I'm not being hyperbolic when I say that. Yeah, I was thinking about like, maybe I should have just played like 6 cantrips or 8 cantrips and cut all my colonnades, and like what would my deck look like? And I think that was an opportunity for Ponder to see more play, and I mean it certainly did in the Splinter Twin decks.
Yep.
So pretty interesting, and that is my aversion to Triomes. I just don't like lands that ETB tapped. It sucks.
I feel you. I think you're right that I kind of build more to decks that can bear that. But when I'm in a scenario like you're describing, when I'm trying to make a 2-color mid-range deck, I'm not one of those who's like, oh, I play this for the cycling value in my 2-color deck. That doesn't work for me. Maybe with some exceptions.
I think if you're playing like Jund or Teamer or something, you'll always start with like 4 Triomes or 4 Raging Ravines or whatever. And I'm just like, how can I get some of these out of my deck?
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's just who we are as people.
Yeah, that works.
But yeah, either way, cool. And will almost certainly be necessary. I mean, I guess like right now, I've been playing some of the Esper Tokens deck, and you have 12 pathways and the duels. I don't even know what we're calling them. Like the duels that you play last.
Yeah, I don't feel like we've established a good name for them.
That's because no one plays standard or whatever. No one talks about it. No one talks about this stuff. It's not part of the discourse, Brian.
Fair enough.
But yeah, you just play a bunch of those. You still have some room for like an Iganjo, maybe a Takanuma, maybe some Hive of the Eye Tyrants, depending on what you're doing. And
you're doing a great job learning the names of those Kamigawa lands, I have to say.
I don't know the second part of them in a lot of instances.
Yeah, there's very few first parts. I know. I know Beseiju. Like Shakazan or something.
Sekenzan.
Sekenzan, okay. So not Shakazan, you're saying?
Yeah, not Shaka Khan or whatever you're thinking.
Okay. Yeah, that's about all I have.
What's rest? What's the last one? Iganjo, Takanuma, Beseiju. Obviously, you know Beseiju.
Yeah, I said Beseiju.
Okay. Otawara, Soaring City.
Yeah, there you go. That's the one we were missing. Welcome to another episode of Us Naming Stuff. Everyone's favorite content.
Basically my point is like the 3-color mana is already pretty good. And if anything, what it's lacking is like how many eye twitches and shambling gas do you want to play, and then how many untapped turn 1 black sources do you want, and how many of the dual lands do you want to cut down on so that you can play like a 2-drop on 2 and a 3-drop on 3, because you don't want to be like turn 1 eye twitch and then turn 2 like tap land, right?
Right.
So obviously things are going to change, and I would assume the decks that come out of Streets are going to be built to be able to like be played with the Triomes, right? Like they're probably not going to be loaded up on 1-drops.
Yeah, you assume we're looking at, powerful wedge cards now, so.
Right. But I mean, you're going to have very good mana with the Triomes. You're probably going to see me cutting Triomes in a lot of instances. Good times.
I look forward to the cuts.
And then the other thing they previewed was an Ascendancy that I'm not going to read because whatever.
Yeah, not very good.
But Ascendancies are back, which is
fine to have that cycle back.
Which is interesting because I'm going through and like finishing up my developing Khans of Tarkir series, and this one that I almost have done, part 2, talks a lot about Jeskai Ascendancy.
Oh, that's cool. Cool little contrast with what's happening right now in design as we revisit these themes.
Also, if you go back and look at some of my decks, I had like a lot of Teamer decks without the Tri-land in it, just even back then, man. I was just like, how can I get these Tri-lands out of my deck? They kind of suck. Like temples. Yeah. People were playing off-color temples. I was like, what are you doing? I don't even want to play the 4.
I like the off-color temples.
I know. But in fairness, that blue-white deck, like you played like an Azorius Charm and a Syncopate and a Jace, and then all your lands get ETB tapped. Like you didn't really care.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking back to like Mono Black. I enjoyed the temples there, and I know a lot of people were strongly against them.
Oh yeah, I cut them all the time.
Yeah, I played a lot of temples.
I think, I don't know, it'd be interesting to go back and look at that too, because there was an invitational in Indianapolis that was on my way to driving to Wizards to start working at Wizards. So packed up all our stuff, went to Indy, I top 8'd the invitational, and then I drove to Wizards to start working at Wizards. And I played Mono Black Devotion there, and it was like GP Louisville was the weekend before, which is where like Brad, Todd, and BBD all made top 8 with it.
Okay.
And so it was like when the deck was first starting to get tuned, and I think I might have played like, did I play 3 Pack Rats or something? I might have only played 3 Pack Rats because I was like, oh, it's pretty bad against Beatdown or whatever. And I'm curious to see like how many temples I played in that versus like when I got out of Wizards. If I was playing, there was definitely an invitational where I played Mono Black. I didn't do very well. I had a Typhoid Rats in my sideboard, don't ask. But I'm curious how many temples I played. It was probably 0.
That might have been, no, it was never pre-temple, right? It was the same set, so.
Yeah. Yeah, they're all the
Yeah,
same
because
set.
I think you're talking about Las Vegas, the one that Max Brown won with also mono black.
No, I mean, I might have played mono black in that one too if I was qualified or could play or whatever. It was
Oh,
weird.
there used to be a lot of Magic tournaments back in the
Yeah,
day. How about that?
yeah. There's a Jersey one. This is where I met Devin O'Donnell.
Okay.
He beat me soundly with mono blue devotion, and my typhoid rats did not save me. Unfortunately,
No, they weren't good enough.
I mean, they might have been good enough. I just didn't really draw them. Maybe I should have played more typhoid rats. Maybe that was the problem. But it was just like that. That's another instance where I'm playing mono black because it's like I got Thoughtseize and Underworld connections, and these cards are tight, and I like them, right? And then I'm just getting beaten to death with like Frostburn weirds and stuff, and I'm just like, your deck looks so bad, but it beats me every time, and it's like so hard. I never played mono blue during that entire period.
Really?
Yeah.
I played 2 decks during that entire format, mono blue, mono black, and I liked both of them, and I think it was correct to play one at some times, and it's correct to play the other at other times.
I think that if I picked up mono blue, I would have not put it down, and I would have won a lot more.
I believe that. Very, very high skill ceiling, but also just capable of like blowing your opponents up too. So
yeah, it was powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it for Streets. I think previews officially start in April. It was like April 7th to April 15th.
1 week long.
Yeah, very short previews. Yeah. Very short preview window. This is the first set also where the pre-release is before the arena release, which is good.
Yeah, I love this. I just think like you completely invalidated any reason to do the pre-release. I mean, I guess if you were to give me full control, I'd just like kill the pre-release, I think, and just have like a release party and focus on that. It's weird to have pre-release, but if you're going to do a pre-release, if you're convinced it's important, it has to happen in paper. It has to.
It's hard to convince me to kill pre-releases when there's always so much excitement surrounding them, and it gets.
Wouldn't that just get transferred to the release party?
No, because you change the branding, right? It's like you change Pro Tour to Set Championship, and suddenly everyone doesn't care.
They did that. Happily.
Weird.
And then they made $1 billion. Wizards of the Coast had its first $1 billion year. I don't know if you knew that, Gerald.
You told me earlier, but
yeah,
I was depressed.
I was trying to keep some mystery behind the podcast.
I was depressed then, and now I'm depressed again. Now that you brought it up, like I pushed it out of my mind. You brought it up again. Think of all the people that like only go to pre-releases, right? They show up out of the woodwork to go to pre-releases, or they don't play Magic for like years. They forget about it, and they're like, "Oh, new set pre-release is coming up," and they know what a pre-release is because like the branding is there and it's existed for so long, and they know what they're getting into, and they know that it's like an onboarding type of event, right? Where it's like you're not required to have like so much knowledge about the game and the format and the cards and everything. Like that needs to exist. That is sacred.
Nothing is sacred to these people, first of all. Second of all, I just think like the branding of release party expresses many of the same things that the branding of pre-release party. Now, granted, are there a bunch of people who know what one is and would treat the release as different? Sure. But I mean, again, we're talking about like you're referring to people who have been around forever, right? That was kind of the argument. And current Magic is so much bigger than the people who have been around forever. There's a reason all this stuff is moved on from and like forgotten about.
I don't mean been around forever, like has played for 10 years and then quit. It could be like someone who has played in like 3 pre-releases over the course of 8 years.
Yeah. I just think if you're an average consumer, not super invested in Magic the Gathering, the concept of a pre-release doesn't make really any sense. And like everything else in the world would do a release party except a TCG where a pre-release has like become sort of a thing.
I agree. I'm just saying that like now we live in the world we're in, that brand carries weight. Maybe it's not sacred to Wizards. It is sacred to me. I feel like they should keep it. And I feel like if you get those players who are like, they hear a set is coming out, they're like, oh, when's the pre-release? And someone's like, oh, they don't do pre-releases anymore, but you can go to a release party. They're like, oh, probably not. Because I would automatically assume that they assume that that is going to be a different event. And if you're going to maintain it, even, I don't know, like, I guess pre-release, like the whole point of it is like it coming out before the set comes out, right? And you're trying to have like a release party, like come on in, buy all your boxes, play whatever formats, right?
Yeah.
And I get that. I think that if anything, you just keep holding the pre-release, you keep calling it the pre-release, and then you still
do it on release day.
Yeah, you just do it on release day.
Okay. That I am in line with that idea. That makes sense to me.
And then people are like, why do they call it a pre-release? And it's just like, shut up. No one asked you, you know, like,
well, just no, here's how I would do it. Here's how I would answer that. Like if the set came out at it comes out March 4th, so it comes out tomorrow. The pre-release would be tonight from like 8 p.m. to 12 p.m. or something like that.
Yeah, but I still want people to just like roll in after work, pick up their case or whatever, and then go back home. Yeah, you can say the set comes out at March 4th, but you still sell it on the 3rd.
But if you're doing the tournament thing, then you're allowed to like sell more of it, right? Because it's the release party, or the pre-release party.
Yeah, whatever. I mean, we can figure it out, but
with our keys to the Castle of Antris, this will be the next thing we tackle.
Christ. I've known so many of those people over the years, man, and I've lived in so many different places. Like I know a lot of people. Right?
The just pre-releasers you're talking about?
Well, I just know a lot of people in general, and so many of them like fall under that category where it's like
I can think of a lot of people like that as well.
Pre-release just like is evocative for someone who has like played in one or more than one of them, right? Yeah. And they know exactly what it is, and it's just like so strong that it's just like I'm going to a PTQ or F&M or a release party, and it's just like nothing. You say like, do you want to come to a pre-release with me or whatever? And they're just like, at the very least, they're like, yeah, I'll consider that. That could maybe be good, Okay. Sacred. There are no sacred cows. This might be one.
Let's check back in a year on this. Remind me in 1 year, listeners. Put a note in your calendar right now.
Unless you're just like, I don't care, burn it down. I mean, like
it's just like when they start changing things, like they've moved this one, right? Like this is in a different time slot than these have been for a while. Then I start scratching my head, like, are they coming for this too? Like, is someone up the chain unhappy with the timing of pre-releases now? And,
well, that was a bad idea, right?
I agree.
And I think that messed with the sacredity.
That is definitely not the word, but I'll allow it.
The sacredity of
I'm an English major. I can give you a one-time pass for that word.
I said it twice.
Okay. Well, the second one didn't count.
Okay, good. Because you show up to a pre-release now and you're in that camp of people and people have already played with the cards for 4 days. And it's like, come on.
Yep.
We're just here to like have some fun and like read cards and make mistakes and hopefully open like Adobe foil or whatever. Like, what the hell? It's just messed up.
Conversation kind of makes me want to experience a pre-release again. Because I'm thinking back to like the ones I did and like them being very good times and enjoying myself. I don't know if I would have the same experience these days.
They were good times until I was kind of like, maybe not at my height, but like before it. And this is like me, sharking local tournaments. Not like, this is kind of like good guy-ish Gerry, but like still super spiky and wants to win, right? So it's like I would go to these tournaments to like win $100 or whatever and show up to a pre-release to get my $20 worth of equity.
Yep.
And sometimes it was like, oh, well, I need to collect packs to draft to test for the Pro Tour or whatever. So it's like my intentions weren't all like super evil or anything, but it was still just like at some point it just dawned on me that like more fun is had. Like even if I'm in the room, more fun is had if I don't play in the tournaments.
Yep. I've had the same feelings.
And there have been a couple times since then where it's like, I'm just going to go and have fun. I have no ulterior motives. I don't care about winning. And like, I went with some folks who fall under the like occasional pre-release crowd or whatever. And, you just go to BS and whatever happens. And I think that was fun. And I can like tone it down when that's the instance, right? But it's like when I'm fighting for rent money or I need to get packs, like getting packs before Pro Tours.
It was a huge deal.
It was hard. It was so hard. Yeah. I've not played in many pre-releases in the last 10 years or so, but definitely when I first started playing Magic, it was just like, my house would have to be on fire for me to miss one. Right.
Agreed. Yep.
So sacred. Anyway, arenadecklist.gg website you can go to. Also, if you just type with inertia and you type .com, that's fine too. You'll get redirected. Started posting some content there. I have some deck of the days. I've not really tweeted about this because I wanted to get sort of like a backlog of content up so that the website didn't look super scarce or whatever. But like, this is going to be an ongoing thing. Like Brian was talking about, he posted a Flesh and Blood article, presumably just because it was like on your mind, right?
Yeah, just something I was working on. And one of the coolest things about being a freelancer now is that I can write a short article. I could write a 200-word article if I want to. If I don't feel like writing, I'm not going to write. I'm just going to put stuff up as it occurs to me. And this was something that I was working on for my own personal edification. I actually tweeted it first, and I was like, why am I tweeting this? Why don't I just go ahead and make an article from this?
I saw it, and then I saw later that the tweet was deleted, and I was like,
well,
oh,
also,
no.
The other thing was I was very sleepy when I was doing it, and then I like went back. I don't know why I don't proofread my tweets before I send them. I proofread them after I send them. And it was
I do that too.
Yeah, it was sloppily written, and I was just like, I look like an idiot. So I just deleted it and then wrote an article instead.
Yeah, so there's that stuff. We have tier lists for standard and modern that are currently up, and we're planning on updating them basically every week. But
yeah, I think standard, I'm just going to always do it every week. There'll always be something. Modern, I'm going to basically adapt as the format, suggests I should.
Right. And that it doesn't happen all that often. I mean, we've obviously seen like a lot of shifts in metagames since MH2 came out because things are still kind of getting solidified, but I think that they're pretty well solidified now.
I would agree with that. Yep.
Although there are some tournaments coming up, so maybe things can change. And there's always like some weird stuff that happens in the challenges, and that influences how and what like people play on Magic Online in the coming weeks and everything. So like there are things that happen. It's just like the good stuff is good in a lot of instances.
Yeah, curious to see as the paper metagame starts rolling again with various spot tournaments, either SCG cons or NRG series. A lot of independent circuits kind of trying to get their feet under them right now. And I think checking out those results is going to be really interesting because I want to see how closely they track to the online metagame.
Yeah, Hunter Burton Memorial is happening March 12th. I think.
Great point. Yep, right around the corner, Hunter Burton. We always wanted to go to everyone, and just with everything going on, it hasn't worked out the last few go-arounds. Let's make a point if things are doing well. Make sure we get back to the next one. It's been too long.
I mean, if things are going well, yes. I mean, you're probably going to see me all over the place because I'm fiending to hang out with people. But like, in order for me to feel comfortable doing that and make it feel like I'm not being a net negative on society by being a possible like vector or whatever, then it's going to take a lot.
Yep, I feel you.
So we'll see. But I mean, I do want to go. I do still support that event. I do like that event. Big modern tournament. Usually some cool stuff comes out of it. But yeah, as far as the tier lists are concerned, modern tier list is pretty interesting. If you go on like Goldfish and look at the metagame breakdown, for example, this is not like a direct paste of that. And there are some reasons for that. I guess like we should talk about both like the decks that are here and kind of the ones that are not here, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest talking point as I post this article. It's less, I disagree with your tier one. It's just, where's this deck? That's the question you get asked more than anything else. So, I think there's probably some expanding to do on what is here and why we like it as much as we do. And then, like you said, what's not here is just as important part of the story.
Thing I like to do, so Goldfish posts the winner's metagame effectively, right? So it's not like the actual metagame of the tournament. It's not even necessarily like what is the best, because a thing that can be the best could have just like shown up in the last couple of weeks or whatever, right? But then it automatically shows you like 30 days worth of data where it's like, oh, well, maybe this other deck was winning a bunch before it, so now it's not like super up to date, right?
Yeah, great starting point though. I mean, I use it as a tool all the time. So,
but one of the things I like doing is like going back to like changing it to 14 days or 7 days.
Yep.
And seeing what really changes. And I guess not a ton has changed. Like things move up and down a little bit, but that's it. And some of it too for modern. I mean, it's like the 4-color deck is like $2,000 or whatever. So that's potentially
gotta have some influence on things. Absolutely.
So tier one, we have Grixis Death Shadow and various builds of Hammer. So white X Hammer, sometimes blue, sometimes black, sometimes mono white.
Basically no pushback on these two being the top two decks.
Good call.
I think that's consensus at this point. I define Grixis Death Shadow as the prototypical modern deck at this point. I think that cheap spells, incredible threats, also very cheap, kind of niche inclusions that just do a very good job. I'm thinking specifically of things like Dress Down at addressing the broader metagame. And then you head to your sideboard and there's great tools there too. And something like this feels like it should always be atop the modern metagame. That's not always the case. And some of that is these decks get targeted. Sometimes other times it's just the linear stuff is so good and, set askew by various overpowered printings, be it Hogak eras or Urza eras. All these things can overcome just the really beautiful construction of the Death Shadow deck, but it never feels like it's going to go away. Like it's always going to be part of the equation. And I think that's a good thing. I think this is a very good best modern deck.
I do too. It means that you're usually safe in your investment in a lot of this stuff, right? Like things may come and go. Maybe at some point they ban Ragavan for whatever reason. Not that I think that they're going to, but regardless, it's just like, well, your Death Shadows are still probably going to be pretty good. You have like all your duels and fetches, whatever. Grixis stuff is pretty nice. And I think in the metagames that you're talking about where like Hogak specifically, it's like, yeah, obviously you can't do something like this. It's just like too inherently fair. I played Jund at a Pro Tour where you could play Hogak, so I know. But in the instances where it's not like really, really weird, like something like Hogak exists and is clearly going to get banned, I think that in those instances, it's a shell like this has not been found or worked on enough to the point where you can get to something that is successful. And that is kind of what happened with this Grixis Shadow deck. It's like it didn't exist until someone put it together and like tuned it to the metagame and included the stuff like the dress downs. So eventually we got to this place where the list is very tuned and maybe you see like a 10 card difference between lists in various top eights. It's like so many of the things are just like, I think people are even like scared to try new stuff at this point because the deck has been winning so much with its current incarnation.
I get that. And it's hard to kind of improve on perfection. Like you're just looking at some of the most efficient spells you can possibly have for their roles and the most efficient threats you could have in their roles. And then all of it tied together by Lurrus means you're having a lot of your choices restricted anyway. You can't even consider the possibility that, maybe I should work my way up the curve. And that's my biggest knock on Lurrus. Like, I don't even think it's a problematic card to have in modern in terms of like play patterns. It's just stifling so much creativity and so many options at this point where I think we'd be better off without it. I think almost every deck that exists that plays Lurrus will continue to exist after Lurrus is gone, and probably most of them will be very, very good.
Right, except then you get to play like Gurmag Angler and sideboards and Lilianas or whatever,
And that's more interesting to me.
It is, for sure. Yeah, I absolutely love it. I mean, maybe these decks would play like Murktide Regent too,
Right. So I am pro Lurrus ban. I'm pro unprinting the companions. Like obviously just the most egregious mistake probably in Magic history, I would say at this point, especially as originally printed. And now even with the massive errata, they still restrict this format to such a huge
it's so laughable to me. They added 3 mana to them.
3 mana.
And in some instances, it's like
best card.
In some instances, it's like, okay, you put your Kakira in your hand and you pitch it to Solitude. Like that's cool. That's a thing that they couldn't do before. So it's not like a full on nerf. But for the most part, it's like such a ridiculous nerf, and they're still just all over the place.
Yeah. Just wild. A wild misstep. And remember when the answer to the companions was that we were just going to have companions in every set? Like that's what everyone thought was going to happen with them.
I would be fine with that versus like, Lurrus Yorion everywhere.
Right. Well, that was the only, if companions exist, that's the only thing that makes sense, right? Is they have to exist forever and be a huge part of the game. And that was obviously not the intended application. So,
I mean, maybe it was like every year or something, but probably not anymore.
So yeah, I don't think so.
Anyway, delete Lurrus from existence. It's fine.
Yep. Also in our second best deck, obviously Hammer Time. And you mentioned the various builds of this deck. Is there one that catches your eye right now that you're particularly fond of?
This is one of the decks where I'm just like, I look at it and it looks kind of inefficient and playing some cards that you don't really want to be playing. And like they all serve a purpose. They all have a role, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, it's just like, I feel like Hammer specifically is the type of deck where if you do figure out the right build, figure out a way to make it like a little bit smoother or whatever, it's just like, it's going to be so good,
Yeah, well, it's already at the top of our tier list, so it's not doing bad for itself.
I know, that's why it's scary. Granted, it's an artifact deck, right? So it is very easy to figure out what sort of stuff you're supposed to point at it to fight. But my thought is that like if you do streamline it or figure out like a better second piece to put in it or something, then maybe you get to sidestep some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's a very good reason to keep exploring. Recent evolutions, things like the reality chip. It's so interesting to me. I'm not even sure it's like offering a useful new angle, but there's no question it just changes the way the deck can play and the type of situations it can play through. And I think what that does, it makes this a staple in the metagame. It means the deck's going to be able to adapt depending on what else is going on. And I also just think like every single sideboard used to start with, here's my hammer suite. I have to be prepared for this deck. Otherwise, what am I doing with my time here? That doesn't really happen to the same degree anymore. And the deck hasn't gotten any worse or any less represented, really. So it's a good time to be a hammer player, I think.
Yeah, I think so too. I remember when I started working on Grixis, more of control thing rather than shadow, but I would play against hammer and just be like, all right, I need to add one more piece of removal. I need to add one more piece of removal. Like the number just kind of kept going up because I always felt like I was starting from behind, and then maybe game one was like 40-60 or something, but it's like then if you lose game one, so easy for them to like steal one in the post-board game. So I felt like I had to be like overly prepared for them always. And I see this happen a lot of times to like streamers too, where it's like they build a deck, they don't explicitly try to hate out this deck like first and foremost, and then you just get got by it. It happens because their deck is like so ruthless and so efficient. And obviously they have some games where it's like you draw Memnites and Ornithopters and Springleaf Drums, and it just looks like a bad Affinity deck, right? And Affinity obviously had those draws where it could just self-destruct, and this deck does too to some extent. But a lot of the time, it's like you're just getting attacked for 10 on turn 3. So
terrifying deck, and again, a deck I think Modern is better for having, which is weird because it's like, quick. It plays the Splinter Twin role, and it does it in a way that I would much rather have that role played than the way Splinter Twin would do it, basically. So I'm down with that.
Yeah, I like that. I don't know if that's like an analogy or whatever, but I like that thought. And that's kind of how I feel about this deck, where it's like you're threatening to make a 10, 11, 12 power thing like very, very quickly, right? And then even if your stuff gets killed, well, you're going to reload with Luris if they don't have a reload, right? So you just continually threaten to put a hammer on something. And if your opponent like loads up on answers for that, and you find a better way to like protect your combo or draw more cards or whatever, it's, you're going to be basically unstoppable. It's like, yeah, they're going to handle your first wave every single time, but like the second, third wave, it's just going to be lights out. I think that's what the reality chip is trying to do, which I'm fine with, but it's weird because you already have, it's like they overlap on mana cost, like reality chip and Luris, because it's like 3 to equip or 3 to buy the Luris or play the Luris or whatever.
True.
And I would like to find something that doesn't directly compete with this thing that you already have access to.
No, that's a good point. It almost feels like they're getting ahead of the Luris ban by exploring these, reality chip builds. And again, I think like if Luris is eventually banned, interesting things happen with this deck too. Like you get to consider more of an equipment suite, and like Stoneforge Mystic becomes a little bit better in that scenario.
And
so
I've seen lists that
I have too.
Don't play Luris, so they can play like a sword in a Cauldron or whatever. And it's like, it's better in XYZ metagames,
I buy it, and I think it's more interesting too. So another good case for No More Companions. How about a third case for No More Companions as we round out the rest of the tier list, Gerald?
Okay. I was looking to see if we did have more tier 1 decks. Did you change my tier list at all?
No. There's 3 tier 1 decks.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't know if I put the 4-color deck in tier 1 or not. I couldn't remember. But yeah,
I would have put it there if you didn't. I think this is a tier 1 deck.
I could see it in 1-5, but yeah, I'm not upset that I put it in tier 1. So 4-color mid-range. This deck is hard to explain. It's like Wrenn and 6 Teferi Omnath is kind of the core, and I suppose Solitude. And then you have Urian, so you're trying to play some amount of things to do with your Urian. So you have Abundant Growth. Most lists are playing Spreading Seas. Expressive Iteration is kind of weird in a deck that is very clunky, but is still just one of the best cards possible. So you just
Yep.
play it. And then some lists were like, well, we need some counter magic, so we're going to play like Dovin's Veto, or maybe we'll play like a counter spell. Now they're just playing 4 counter spells, and it's like
Just jamming.
it's
Yep.
not that easy to cast.
It's not, but also it's good as the game goes long, and you're not like miserable if you can't necessarily play it on turn 2. And in our tier list, when I referred to Death Shadow as like the prototypical modern deck, I pointed this out as the modern deck. This is like the future of modern, the MH2 version of modern, with free spells and then just absurdly powerful stuff that you just glue together via abundant growth and this stupid companion that sits in the exile zone and then draws you 6 cards at the end of the game, and you can never actually come back from. And then, really solid removal in the form of Prismatic Ending, Lightning Bolt, just super efficient answers. And it's strange that this is what modern looks like, but this deck is very good, and I think you should account for it. I think you should be ready for it. And it's shocking that this is where we ended up. But it's also cool to see, because think of how long you couldn't play this style in modern. It just wasn't going to work. You could pretend like Azorius Control was a real deck. It wasn't the vast majority of the time. Jund had moments where it was good, but they were mostly moments where it had to be overpowered. Playing fair has not been a thing through the vast majority of modern's history. It's been about finding linear approaches. So this deck, while all of its cards are absurd, it is inherently fair. Like, it's looking to just kind of make bodies and draw cards and attack, and it's just weird what you have to use to get to that point. But this is the answer now, and I half love it and half hate it. That's just the way I feel about this deck.
Yeah, I think about like 16-year-old me getting into Magic, and I'm just like, oh, what does your deck do, right? And it's just like, oh, well, I natural order for a big creature, or I like tap Tolarian Academy for a bunch of mana and then draw cards, where I'm like, okay, that makes sense, right? And then you show me this deck, and it's like, what does it do? And you're like, stuff.
It's got a lot of good cards in it. That's about it.
Right. And I'm just like, I don't get it. And even now, I'm still looking at it, I'm like, I don't really get it. If not for, I think, mainly like Gabe Nassif and Canister streaming, and both of them having a penchant for Omnath, Locus of Creation, I'm not sure that this deck would exist.
Maybe not. And it does speak to how much like individual content creators can still move the modern metagame. It's really interesting.
Yeah, so it is weird that we have gotten here, and I think, Nassif tried like Zulus with Omnath, and then he put Omnath in blue-white control, and Canister was playing actual elementals because he wanted to Risen Reef with the pitch elementals. But obviously, you're like, well, I'm going to play Omnath, I'm going to play Ren and Teferi just because they're good cards. And eventually he just like cut the mopey elementals and moved towards something like this. And then I think Kane Reinhardt was the one who added the Spreading Seas to the deck and everything. Now we're at a place where the deck just plays Ragavan because it's a very good card, like very good in the mirror. Why not? Deck wasn't expensive enough, right? And Ragavan is one of the cards that I liked in my Grixis control deck because like I would side it out a lot, but against decks like Tron and Amulet and stuff, it like gives you a way to actually pressure them because it's so hard to play like a full control role, right?
Yep.
So that kind of just like solves some of your problems in that regard. And deck just looks super weird, but it is good. If you have not played with or against it, I highly recommend that you do so.
Same.
All right, on to 1-5, which is a weird category, because it's like, is it actually tier 1.5, or can we just call it tier 2 and then everything below is tier 3? But like, I think that these decks are not tier 1 and they're not tier 2, So like, what the hell are we supposed to do, right?
The way I view tier 1.5 is that against the field at large, they have an edge. Against the other tier 1 decks, they may be a step behind, or are in some cases a somewhat worse version of an already existing deck. And that's the way I've always looked at tier 1.5.
Yeah.
Does it have to exist? No, it could just be tier 2. I mean, all this is arbitrary.
Yeah, so it could be tier 2, but then like tier 2 is so large and these decks are definitely better than the other stuff in tier 2. So
yes, sure.
It doesn't make sense for tier 2 to just be like 2 decks, but whatever. So one of them is it Murktide? One of them is Amulet Titan. Is it Murktide? I think is mostly a bad shadow deck because you don't have a companion, and you don't have the discard, and your cards are a little bit more clunky. There are also just a bunch of matchups where counter magic isn't the best form of disruption or like a thing that you necessarily even want. So you're mostly getting by on maybe having like a slightly less painful mana base and having the ability to have more card advantage with like Archmage's Charm in addition to Expressive Iteration, although Shadow covers that by having like Luris and Kolaghan's Command type of stuff. But you play Murktide Regent, right? And this is one of the things that has been bothering me the most about Modern is that everyone is just like, I jam Prismatic Ending over everything, and I jam like Fatal Push and Lightning Bolt over everything, and they just like don't have enough ways to kill Murktide Regent, which is what I think is propping this deck up.
I couldn't agree more. I think that is like the essence of this deck. You're basically asking yourself two questions when you're choosing to play this over Death Shadow. And again, I think this justifies the tier 1.5 thing. It's still a great choice. It's still better than the vast majority of decks in Modern. But to play it over Death Shadow, you have to say, I want counter magic more than like hard counter magic more than I want Black Disruption. And that's not to say Death Shadow can't play counter magic as well. So you have to really be committed to the idea of counter magic. And then the other point is Murktide Regent hard to kill? I think the answer to that question is yes right now. Murktide Regent is very hard to kill and super sticky threat. Love that part of the deck. The problem is I don't think counter magic is where I want to be. I like the proactivity of Death Shadow a little bit more and the way it uses its mana. So ultimately lean towards Death Shadow, but you're exactly right. It's all about the sizing of Murktide Regent and how well it dodges the commonly played removal in the format.
And Shadow has Drowning the Lock. So
it's true.
You're specifically saying like, I need Counterspell to target 7 mana cards or whatever.
Yeah. I was just thinking about like Luris again, making it less interesting because then you would be squeezed between like, do I play Gurmag Angler? And it's so strange how much creativity is squeezed out of the format by its linearity. But yeah, you're right. Drown in the Lock, very ready to answer this problem. So
yeah, and I think Murktide is better if there was a matchup where you just wanted a bunch of counter magic, or if you knew that your opponents couldn't kill Murktide. And I would not bank on my opponents not being able to kill Murktide because, like, realistically, they should just be like playing more Terminates or even like Path to Exile, but people just refuse to, and they just keep losing to the card. I don't get it. But even in the matchups where maybe you think you want counter magic more, it's like Amulet has a bunch of Cavern of Souls, and
true.
The combo decks are just like Cascade decks a lot of the time, so the discard is completely fine there. Although, you know, Leyline of Sanctity is like good against you out of Living End, whereas it doesn't do anything here. But I just think that like the discard is usually even just better than the counter magic. So
we are on the same page, Gerald.
Yeah. Other tier 1.5 deck, Amulet. Amulet is very good, very scary. Another deck that at various times I think people should have been more prepared for, and they weren't, which is probably why it did so well. And now it's like everyone else's decks, I think, are getting better. And Amulet has also found a very good list and a very good shell. And it's just like everyone else's decks are better, so they don't need to try and hate on it as much. But they still could afford to have, you know, some more hate cards for this matchup.
Yeah, Amulet Titan has picked up some new inclusions over the past couple set. Cultivator Colossus is a big one. The other one now is Beseju, of course. So these are big adds. Like they are good for the deck, but the core has been so solid for so long, and the deck does just kind of like do the thing it wants to do. And it keeps getting these upgrades, but they are marginal. Doesn't feel like quite the right word. They're not changing the way the deck operates.
Right.
Like you could do all the things that this deck did before. It's just maybe you do it a little bit more consistently now, or you have a secondary option or a good tertiary option. All those things are being added into the deck, but it's still the same thing at its core, where other decks feel like they're making like fundamental leaps forward.
Yeah, Beseju slightly changes things, although for things that don't typically matter right now, like in the case of Blood Moon, for example. And Cultivator Colossus is just like, well, I am slightly more threat dense, and if I have enough Cavern of Souls, I will just never lose to a control deck, which is awesome. That's cool. Yeah. And you don't have to play filler cards like Explorer anymore. You know, it's like you have enough of the good stuff going on, and you're game plan is very consistent. You have Saga as a backup plan and consistency for finding Amulet and everything. Your sideboard cards are pretty solid. So unless there is something that actually like speeds the deck up or allows it to do something very, very different, this is kind of like the final form that I would expect of it.
Yeah. I think it's a fine final form and just good enough for tier 1.5.
Yeah. It's very good, but it's still just like, well, I would probably prefer to register something else for a tournament. Like if I'm going to consistently be doing something on like turn 2, turn 3, it should be like Hammer or Shadow, not this.
Yeah, I mean, if you invested in one foil deck and that's kind of what you're stuck with, though, I guess it's going to be Amulet again.
Yes, for the Bryans out there, that is true.
Yep.
So tier 2, Azorius Control, Boros. Although I'm pretty sure I put Burn on here and you did Prowess.
I did. I like Prowess better. I didn't know if you were like tied to the idea of a specific Burn archetype or if you had a little bit more flexibility and you were like thinking of both of them. For my money, I think Prowess is the better deck out of the two. Do you disagree?
I do. Okay. I think Prowess is good, but definitely gets hated on by a lot of the same stuff that like Shadow and Hammer would. And Burn's main draw for me is the fact that so much of what the format is about doesn't interact with them very well. It's like, yeah, you kill my creatures, but then I will just burn you out, and there's no way for you to really stop me because like no one's really playing life gain. Whereas if you stabilize against this deck, you're probably not going to get burned out.
Yeah, I think this deck has picked up a lot of reach though in terms of like just good card draw engines. Like now having both Light Up the Stage and Reckless Impulse means you have multiple draw twos. So you still have your Luris, Mishra's Bauble stuff going on. It's tough to run this deck out of cards, and
it's tough to run them out of cards. But I mean, that's just like a different way of trying to. Like you're trying to ignore their removal spells by like drawing more creatures, right? Mm-hmm. But I think the better plan for Modern as a whole is just drawing burn spells. And I think this is a fine plan. Don't get me wrong; it's not bad. It's just and like this deck also has been doing pretty well lately.
Yeah. So here's my question for you: if you have burn in this slot in your eyes, so you don't think Prowess is a tier 2 worthy deck? You would have it like below all the other decks here.
Tier 2.5.
Okay, tier 2.5. I can live with that.
Prowess is a good deck in a vacuum. It's kind of like Amulet, but worse, where you now have all the pieces for what you would want for this sort of deck. Like you don't have to do weirdo Stormwing entity stuff anymore to have like a cohesive Prowess deck. It's like you have all the 1-drops, you have all the card drawers, you have all the like burn and things to trigger Prowess and everything. But it's just like that compared to what the rest of Modern is doing is not a good game plan.
How about sideboarding? I think this deck sideboards pretty well for what it is. And that would be another big draw of it to me. Like you never quite go full control, full mid-range, but you can be disruptive, like sneakily disruptive.
Yeah. I think. No, I agree with that. And if you're doing that, then just play Shadow.
Sure.
Like so many of these cards, I would rather just have like Thoughtseize instead of,
I would always rather have a Thoughtseize. Yeah, I still stand by the opinion that this is a better deck than the Boros Burn deck. Your argument doesn't strike me as off base, though. And if I didn't have Boros Burn here, it would also be tier 2.5 for me. Okay. So I kind of looked at this slot as encompassing both, and then I just chose one list. I think my concession when I next update the list, I'll just add Boros Burn to the same spot. And then that'll be our compromise.
It's all semantics, It's like this is not down to a science. It's just like
that's what we're here for, semantics. We literally host a podcast. I don't know if semantics didn't exist, neither would we.
Yeah, so. That's fair. We certainly wouldn't be able to talk for over an hour.
Right.
I think regardless, these decks are good in certain metagames, right? Mm-hmm. And that's kind of why they're in tier 2. It's like you could jam this deck, whatever Boros deck, on Magic Online for a year straight in varying metagames to varying degrees of success, but it would always be solid success.
Yep.
And I think where you see your win rate spike would just be at different times.
Sure.
But I would not necessarily take either of these decks to any single tournament,
Yeah. When it comes to Modern, I've always been a tier 1, tier 1.5 type guy. Although I look at the next deck on our tier 2 list, and this is a deck I considered taking to a tournament fairly recently. So
Golgari Yawgmoth.
Yeah.
It's good, kind of like Amulet. This is nearing its final form until it gets like a very specific print. People have done good work to tune it. Grist has added a lot. Ignoble Hierarch has added a decent amount. Boseju's kind of cool. People are figuring out like how to sideboard and everything,
Yep.
but it's still just it is stuck in doing what it does.
Think it's the best creature combo deck. Something has to occupy that slot, and creature combo is going to exploit certain metagames. And
I think Heliod's making a comeback though.
okay, interesting. With the addition of Grist, I think this deck mostly just has a leg up on that deck. Is there a reason why you think Heliod is well positioned right now? Or is it just seeing more play than it was previously?
It's seeing more play, and it's probably just, like more of the one drop creature decks versus like big control decks. And, I do think that it has like better matchups. I do think it's gotten some like pretty interesting cards too. Whereas the deck, instead of being like a clunky 3 and 4 mana pile, is now a lot cheaper as a whole, which is definitely good for it and for its backup plan and everything.
Yeah.
It's still hell to play on Magic Online, so it's difficult to say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Difficult to say like how big it would actually be in a real life tournament where people were under the impression that it was good, for example. But we're in the world we're in,
Yeah, like I said, I'm fascinated to see how paper metagames change what we think of Modern, because it certainly got to shake things up a little bit. So
next up we have Jund Saga, also with Luris, of course. This is basically Grixis Shadow, but kind of worse.
But worse, yep.
Tarmogoyf used to be my jam. Just does not do it for me anymore.
I just want to read what I wrote about this deck, because I wanted to name someone very specific. I want to see if you can come up with who I was thinking of. And they certainly are good-natured enough that I could have named them. And we'll see if you can pick out who it's supposed to be. So what I wrote was, maybe Jund Saga Luris is just a far worse version of a top-tier deck like Grixis Shadow. It doesn't matter. Idiot Boomers, a.k.a. me. I wanted to name someone else there, but I put myself in the spotlight. Can't get enough of Thoughtseize or Inquisition into Tarmogoyf, and nowadays they're at least trying to show how fresh and hip they are by getting real Magic cards like Urza's Saga, Luris of the Dream Den, and Mishra's Bauble into their foiled out relic of a 75. Understand how your matchup changes against pressure from Tarmogoyf, and you'll get to hold it over the washed up ex-semi-pros at your LGS on a weekly basis.
So I'm supposed to name someone who has a foil version of this deck?
It doesn't, I mean, like, that's the Jund guy thing, is that like the deck is always foil. Whoever plays it. Yeah. I had someone in mind while I was writing this, besides myself, because I also fall into this category. But
I do too, although I'd like to think that I moved past it after playing Jund at a Pro Tour.
Okay.
I probably haven't, let's be real. But
yeah.
I don't know who you're talking about now.
Okay, I was gonna name Snook. I'm sorry, Snook.
Oh yeah, Snook's a good one.
Yeah, he's a Jund guy. I can't blame him. I love this stuff. I love playing Jund decks. It's worse Grixis Death Shadow though, in so many ways.
I do the same stuff, but just with Grixis, and like,
yeah.
Granted, I think that was maybe part of the reason for like the Shadow resurgence, was that like the control Grixis decks were doing so well, and then people were just like, I hate not attacking, and then they just jammed some creatures into it.
Just couldn't take it anymore.
It ruined it. Yeah. But I mean, there are also people working on like Shadow independently, like before that happened. So who knows? Whatever. Yeah, Jund's basically worst version of Shadow. I mean, if you want to play like a big threat, Tarmogoyf just isn't it. 2 mana is so much, and you don't get very much. And Tarmogoyf,
that's wild to say, but I agree 100%.
Tarmogoyf used to be so good at being a brick wall, and now even against like the prowess creatures, like they just run right through it, or like DRC flies over it. Like I guess it does block Ragavan, but like, so would Shadow or your own Ragavan.
Anything blocks Ragavan. That's not Ragavan's strength. It has many strengths, but surviving combat, not one of them.
Yeah. So I don't really like this. Saga is good. This is a good version of Jund, kind of similar to everything else. It's like, this is just what it is capable of doing at its peak efficacy, and that is just not where I want to be.
With you.
Belcher, March of Reckless Joy in this Belcher list. Love to see it.
Yep.
Kind of called that for Storm, but it makes sense here, so that's dope. I think this deck is good.
I do too. I think this is the perfect deck to actually round out tier 2, because it doesn't see anywhere near the amount of play it probably should. I think that's because it's like not going to be a particularly good time playing it most of the time, and you kind of feel like you're leaving your tournament up to chance. Although this isn't like Legacy Belcher, it's a very different scenario, and there is more play to it. But you are giving up some degree of agency, and people don't like to do that. So you don't see as much Belcher as you should. But there's always got to be something in Modern, which is just like the balls to the wall hyperlinear combo. Neoform occupied this space for a very long time. Neoform sort of does it better, but like not. Like it's better at just being the completely blow you out of the water turn one deck for sure. But Belcher is more consistent, and you want to tone it down just a little bit and get to a place where Belcher is your representative of that archetype. So one of the things I want this tier list to be is like, you're going to a tournament, you can look at this and choose your deck from it. And that's totally fine. You choose anything from the top tier, I think you'll be served well. But also, if for whatever reason you're not going to do this, if you're going to have a good time, you don't care about winning the tournament, you want to be semi-competitive, I want this to be something you can refer to say, what do I need to account for? What do I need to prepare for? What is the rest of the format? And I think like putting Belcher on here serves a much better purpose than putting on, another worse than Death Shadow deck that could occupy the same slot.
I think if there's like anything that I do better than anyone else in Magic, it is accounting for like the 1 or 2% decks in the metagame, because I don't necessarily do it at an opportunity cost. I just try and get my percentage points where I can for free. And Belcher is definitely one of the decks that I would want to account for, even if it's not a big part of the metagame share. And like some of it is like, oh yeah, like a lot of the stuff that you would use to interact with like a Belcher on the stack or whatever are things that would be good against Cascade, like Living End, or, you want to blow up artifacts. Well, you want to blow up artifacts against Hammer too, so it's just like, well, maybe I would have like an extra one of those cards in my deck. And also just, be aware that like Belcher is a deck and know what their deck is capable of too. And I think that is like the big difference between like me playing an archetype, someone else playing the same archetype, and like maybe me getting like an extra win or two out of the event than someone else.
Yep. I would get the same wins, I think, via careful sideboarding. I mean, when I was doing very well at Magic, it was mostly through building very cohesive, very well-planned sideboards that accounted for what they needed to account for. And that's why Belcher's here. It just gives you one more thing to keep in the back of your memory. And like you said, you don't want 6 anti-Belcher specific hate cards in your sideboard. You just want to push some of those numbers up to things that can also interact with this deck.
The best example of this that I just thought of is Pro Tour Rivals, where I played Mardu Pyromancer. And I asked Mattia what he was playing. He said Mardu. I was currently in a league with Mardu. And I was like, well, here are the problems I had. And he showed me his list. And I was like, this solves a lot of the problems, right? So we kind of worked on it. We're talking about our sideboard. And I was like, I want to play 2 Wear and Tears. And he's like, Wear and Tear? Why? What for? What matchup? And he's, like, I think we pulled up Goldfish and we're like going down the list of the top decks, right? And it's just like, which one of these decks do you want Wear and Tear for? I was like, dude, like Modern's wide open. It's weird, right?
Yep.
And I played against Ad Nauseam, playing for top 8. And it's like Leyline of Sanctity, Lotus Bloom type of stuff, right? And it's just like, Modern is a weird format. People are not only going to play the top tier. And like, this was also Modern, where it's like Tron's good and humans are good, but like not by much, right? People, there's certainly going to be like 25% humans, but then what everyone else plays past that is going to be like 2% this, 2% this, 2% this, right?
Yep.
I think that he told me like he lost to like Leyline of the Void, rest in peace, like all the stuff, right? And I was just like, yeah, I played against those and I just killed them with my Wear Tears, and I got to play against Ad Nauseam for top 8 and like killed their Phyrexian on life. So
yep, easy game.
All it takes, 2 sideboard slots, covers you against random nonsense. So for the stuff that's not on tier 2, I think that a lot of people will just be like, what about this? Which is usually like, this is the deck that they play.
Yep, there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah, I play this. Why isn't my deck good? Team of Rhinos.
Yep, that was the one. More than anything else.
Living End, I would put on the list now.
I said that I was closer to putting Living End on than I was Team of Rhinos. So
Tron, which I think is always a threat, and is kind of one of those things where like people are not like respecting a lot, but also is at its final form is only as good as it's going to be. So maybe they don't necessarily have to. Like Shadow could probably just beat them even without a bunch of hate.
Right. That would be in like my tier 2.5.
Yeah, same
area.
There are so many blue artifact decks, and I'm just waiting for them all to kind of like coalesce into a shell that is very good and for everyone to copy it. And then that'll be like solidly tier 2 or 1.5. Mill, not good, I don't think. scary, and I might put like an Emrakul in my sideboard, depending on the deck I'm playing, but
Right.
not great. Dredge, again, kind of scary. Usually, you see some graveyard hate in people's sideboards. In Shadow, they'll play like Night Owl Spellbomb for the mirror. If you're worried about Living End, which is now like a Magic Online thing that you do need to worry about, maybe you play Soul Guide Lantern instead because they're going to leyline you.
Yep.
But regardless, like you're playing some amount of graveyard hate for Dredge, and I would be the person that's just like, oh, there are no graveyard decks. I guess I'm playing, 2 Soul Guide Lanterns or whatever. What else? What else do you think is like 2-5, tier 3, or like people are mad?
No, you did a good job running it out there. Living End is my next deck up. Like that would be my next thing to have on the list. I have never really been in love with rhinos. I just think like
it's got the Tarmogoyf problem.
Yeah, who is the rhino playing good against? Like I just don't believe it's good against anyone. And I don't know. I've never believed in it. And obviously it has won tournaments. Not really recently. Like if you look around, there's not a lot of rhinos in the Magic Online Challenge results. Again, I'll track it as we get back to paper play. I want to see what happens there, how represented it is in that field, but never a deck that's impressed me. So just one of those things that we made the tier list, and neither one of us likes the deck very much, so that's not going to make it. In terms of what's missing, I like this tier list. I think it's a good representation of the top of the format. I think this is the most useful thing I can present to someone. If it was just utility, I think there's enough people making the rhinos mistake that you can make a case that it's supposed to be on this tier list because you should be aware of it and accounting for it. But that's the whole thing. You don't have to account for it. Like do your thing, and your thing can compete with rhinos in the vast majority of instances. And if you account for it, then you're just miles ahead.
Yeah. So. Like Hammer, who cares? Right.
Yep.
You just try and do your thing. It's going to beat theirs. Shadow is mostly similar, but I think that there are definitely instances where it's like, oh, maybe you want to play a Chalice or an Explosives or whatever, just to get some percentage points there. I think this was like really a big deal when Explosives was actually good and people were just not really playing them, and like Rhinos was doing well, and it's like, I mean, this is why, like, there's a card that, like, you could be playing and would be good in your deck and would be good against Rhinos.
Easy adjustment. Very easy adjustment.
Yeah. So, things like that. Consider that Modern is a very, very large format, and, people do have narrow deck selection a lot of the time because of, like, preferences or card availability or whatever, and you can run into anything at any time. And if you can account for those things kind of for free, you will be pretty well served for it. And I kind of think that's what the 4-color Urian decks are doing now, where it's like, well, they have some reg events, they have some counter spells, and like they're accounting for not just the top tier, right? It's like, well, now they have game if they actually play against Tron, for example.
Right. Yeah, just getting broader and broader in their play base. And that's Modern in a nutshell, right? Account for everything, be proactive, be quasi-linear, or just play absurd spells, and that's how you get ahead.
Account for as much as you possibly can. And
good life advice.
Yeah, but part of that involves being linear to some degree, or at least like proactive. And I think that is what Shadow's doing best.
Can I tell you, good show this week. Significantly less miserable than the last few shows, I will say. I enjoyed this quite a bit. Not that I didn't enjoy doing the past few shows. I always enjoyed doing the show. Just in a bad mood about Magic, but doing these tier lists these last couple of weeks, both these formats are really good. Standard's really good. Modern is excellent. And you gotta start turning the corner somewhere. Obviously, many of my problems with Magic have nothing to do with how good various decks are.
Right.
Same. But it was still nice to get into this and find some really nice surprises and just see generally healthy meta games. So good to see. Good job, Wizards. Thumbs up. Enjoy that $1 billion.
I mean, you quote unquote earned it. Modern does have some problems though. Don't gloss over that. But like, despite those problems, it's still very fun, enjoyable, whatever.
Yeah, I think there's moves to make. Like I said, Luris is a no-brainer to me. I think it's all upside. We've ripped off the Band-Aid, and nobody is going to lose their mind about Luris being gone. So I would make that move. But even in the absence, we have a pretty good format.
Yeah, I mean, who gets mad if you just delete Luris?
Nobody. There's no chance anyone cares.
But you think keep Urian? Just allow it? Just let it happen?
In some ways, the decks that play Urien, or they just need something like that. And having something that is just this mush of mid-range spells is good for Modern, I'm pretty sure. But maybe it could just be like Niv Mizzet or something. Like maybe the world's a better place when that's the thing that looks like this and not Urien. So it's probably not good enough anymore, though. So I think Urien is also terrible, but at least does something that could be argued as net positive for the format. Lurrus has zero upside.
Yes.
So.
Yep. Agreed. Game.
Good luck.